The job title on my union personnel record reads Research Administration Coordinator, Empathy Studies Annex, Station Orith 9, which is the kind of title that sounds like it was assembled by committee from spare parts. What it means in practice is that I run the intake paperwork for the station's resident research subjects, file the weekly status reports that the compact requires for any non-human individual under extended observation, manage the supply requisitions, and maintain the records room at the end of the East Corridor, the one with the broken ceiling panel that I have submitted 4 repair requests about and that nobody has fixed in 3 years. I am 48 years old. I have dark hair going silver at the temples, a scar along my jaw from a cargo handling incident 16 years ago on Thresh 4, and hands that look older than they are from years of working in pressurized environments that were always slightly too dry. Before Orith 9, I spent 11 years as a garrison medical records clerk on the Outer Rim stations, which is where I learned that the most important thing you can do for someone is file their paperwork correctly and on time. It is not glamorous. It is not the kind of thing that gets recognized at year-end commendations, but it is the difference between a person having a record and a person not having one, and in the systems that govern the outer lanes of the compact, those two things are not equivalent. I have been the intake coordinator for Sarel Anveth for 3 years, 1 month, and 11 days. I know the exact figure because I filed her initial observation enrollment on a Tuesday in late autumn, and I have filed a status report every 7 days since, which means I have produced 167 separate documents on her behalf, each one reviewed and signed and timestamped before the end of the business day on which it was due. This is not unusual for my department. What is unusual is that I have also spent, across those same 3 years and 1 month and 11 days, something in the neighborhood of 900 hours sitting with her in the artificial daylight courtyard at the center of the annex. Not working, not conducting assessments, just sitting. I want to be clear about what the courtyard is, because it matters. It is a rectangular space about 15 meters by 12, enclosed on all sides by the gray polymer walls of the annex's interior. The ceiling is a light panel array that cycles through an approximation of a standard planetary day, pale blue-white in the mornings, warmer and more golden toward what the panel's programming calls afternoon, dimming through a slow amber gradient to a low operational level that passes for evening. There are planters along the south wall with actual soil in them, and a species of low broadleaf plant from Velthar that the research staff installed in the early days of the annex's operation, because someone had read that Velthori subjects responded better in environments with some organic material present. The plants are real. The daylight is not. But after 3 years, the distinction has stopped feeling important. The Velthori research staff do not sit in the courtyard with Sarel. I should explain why, because it is the thing that most people, the few who know anything about this posting at all, find hardest to understand. The Velthori are an empathic species. Not in the loose metaphorical sense the word sometimes gets used in diplomatic briefings, where it just means that a species is socially attentive or reads emotional cues well. I mean that members of the Velthori species transmit and receive emotional imprints, what their own literature calls the weight of other minds, through a low-intensity biological field generated by a cluster of filament organs along the jaw and collarbone. The range is short, 1 meter or 2 at most, and the intensity varies enormously between individuals, but the basic mechanism is documented and confirmed by 3 independent union research teams over the last 40 years. When a Velthori person experiences a strong emotion, grief, fear, joy, the particular quality of longing that their language has 6 distinct words for and standard compact has none, someone standing close enough will feel a version of it. Not the same experience. A shadow of it, a resonance. For most Velthori, this is a managed, socially regulated thing. There are customs around it, distance protocols. the proper way to receive someone's grief without letting it overwhelm you, the etiquette of proximity, a whole architecture of behavior built up over generations to make communal life possible when everyone around you is, to a slight but real degree, broadcasting. Sorel Anveth is not most Velthori. She was born with the filament organs of a memory keeper, a lineage function within the Velthori royal house structure that the Compact's research records describe as substantially amplified empathic reception and archival capacity. In practice, what this means is that she does not merely feel the shadows of other people's emotions. She absorbs them. She retains them. She carries them, the grief, the fear, the joy, the 6 varieties of longing, as living imprints in her own nervous system, layered over years and decades, an accumulating interior library of other people's inner lives. The Velthori word for it is Orith Seneth. The research files translate it as burden-carrying, which is accurate but cold. The Velthori themselves, or the branch of the Velthori who did not understand what she was, translated it as a curse. She was classified as a burden carrier at the age of 19, after the second of 2 incidents in which her amplified field destabilized the emotional equilibrium of everyone within range of her during a moment of severe personal distress. The Velthori institutional response was neither cruel nor kind. It was procedural. She was removed from court function, enrolled in the Union Empathy Research Program as a high-intensity transmission subject, and transferred to the annex on Station Orith 9, which is 11 transit towers from the nearest inhabited system and which was specifically selected. The original transfer documentation notes, because its population density is low and its distance from any Velthori community is sufficient to prevent secondary transmission events. The research staff assigned to her are human because humans do not receive the field. Our neurology lacks the receptor architecture. We feel nothing. We stand a meter from Sorel Anveth during her worst moments and our inner lives remain entirely our own. This is why the annex is human-staffed. It is the only practical solution. The research staff are professional and they are careful and they are, in the way of people who have read every document about someone before meeting them, slightly afraid of her. Not of what she will do, of what she carries. Of the knowledge that inside this small, quiet, ash-blue woman with the onyx eyes and the silver-gray hair cut close to her skull, she keeps it short. She told me once, because long hair collects static and static makes the field irregular, inside her, stacked like sediment, is the accumulated emotional weight of every person she has ever been close to. 11 years of collected grief and fear and joy that is not hers, that she holds for other people, that no one comes to retrieve. I sat with her for the first time by accident. It was a Tuesday, the same day I filed her initial enrollment, and I had taken my afternoon break in the courtyard because the records room felt small and the east corridor smelled of the cleaning compound they use on the floor panels, and I needed 10 minutes somewhere that didn't smell like that. She was already there, sitting on the low wall beside the broadleaf planters, not reading, not working, looking at the light panel cycling toward its afternoon setting. I nodded to her. She nodded back. I sat on the bench across the courtyard and ate a ration bar and looked at the plants, and after about 7 minutes I went back to my desk. The following Tuesday, I took my break in the courtyard again. She was there again. We nodded. I sat. After a few minutes she said, quietly, without looking away from the light panel, "You filed the intake documents correctly." I said that I tried to. She said, "The previous coordinator used the wrong form for Section 4. It invalidated 2 months of status reports before anyone caught it." I said I was sorry to hear that. She said it had taken 8 weeks to correct the filing and that during those 8 weeks her enrollment status had been technically unresolved, which meant that certain medical requests had been administratively suspended. I said that was a significant problem. She said, "Yes." I said I would double-check my Section 4 formatting. She said, "I already reviewed your last 6 filings. They are correct." Then she looked back at the light panel and we sat without talking until my break ended. That was the beginning of it. I cannot explain it easily because the thing that happened over the following months was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. I took my breaks in the courtyard. She was usually there. Sometimes we talked and sometimes we didn't. She asked me once what I had done before Orith 9, and I told her about the garrison postings, the medical records work, the 11 years of filing other people's health documents and making sure the numbers matched the names. She listened carefully. She asked specific follow-up questions, not polite questions, real ones. The kind of questions that tell you a person has been paying attention to what you actually said, rather than waiting for you to stop talking so they can respond. I asked her 3 or 4 months in whether she found the courtyard useful, whether the plants helped. She considered the question for a moment and then said, "The plants are from Velthar. They were planted by someone who thought they would comfort me. They don't, but I appreciate that someone thought about it." She looked at the broadleaf plants for a moment. "The light panel is wrong. The morning color is slightly too blue, but I have stopped noticing it." I asked whether she wanted me to submit a calibration request. She said, "I have submitted 3. The panel is within operational parameters. The parameters are calibrated for human visual comfort, not Velthari." I said I could refile it, framing it as a research environment quality issue rather than a comfort request, and see if that moved the queue. She looked at me. I was not sure what her expression meant. She said, "That would be different." The calibration was adjusted within 2 weeks. Small things. That is how it went. I am not telling this as though it built towards something dramatic, because it didn't, not for a long time. She needed her paperwork done correctly. I did it correctly. She needed someone to sit near without the weight of their inner life pressing against hers. I sat near her and felt nothing in the way that humans feel nothing, which is its own kind of presence. She had spent 11 years in the annex with people who were professionally careful about her and personally cautious, who did their jobs and went home, who treated the fact of her existence as something to be managed. I just took my breaks in the courtyard. I want to say something about what that means, the feeling nothing. People assume it means I was getting the easier end of the arrangement, that she was absorbing the difficulty and I was protected from it. And in a simple physiological sense that is true. The Velthari empathic field passed through me the way light passes through a clean window. I did not receive anything. I did not come away from our afternoons carrying emotional sediment that was not my own. I was, in the terms the research files use, neurologically transparent to the transmission. But I was not sitting there in a neutral state. I was sitting with a person who had been classified as a curse, who had been removed from her world at 19 and placed in a research annex on a distant station and professionally managed for 11 years, who had learned to keep the distance between herself and other people with the care of someone who has been told repeatedly that their proximity is a problem. I could not feel what she was carrying, but I could see the shape of it in the way she held herself when new research staff were introduced to the annex. The slight withdrawal, the precise social distance, the specific angle of her posture that kept her filament organs turned away from the room. I could see it in the way she answered questions, never more than was asked, never volunteering information that might invite longer contact, because longer contact meant more weight transferred. 11 years of learning to be as small a presence as possible. I sat with her and I was not careful about that. I did not treat her presence as something to be carefully managed. This is perhaps the plainest thing I can say about what happened in the courtyard over 3 years. What I learned about her over 3 years came in the way things come when no one is performing for anyone. Not as a disclosure or a confession, but as an accumulation. Small facts, offered without weight, that added up to a person. She had been studying compact administrative law since her 3rd year in the annex. Not for any practical purpose, initially. There was no reason to think the knowledge would help her. But because the research library had the full compact legal archive, and she had read through most of the biological science sections and the xenoanthropology sections, and needed something new. She had a methodical mind. She liked systems that had internal logic, even when the logic produced bad outcomes, because at least with a system you could find the relevant clause. People, she told me once, were harder. People improvised. She had been a student of classical Valthori history before her classification. She had been studying the memory archivist lineage function specifically, its role in preserving the royal house's emotional historical record across generations, as an academic interest, not knowing what she was. The irony of this she mentioned only once, in passing, with the particular quality of stillness that I had learned meant she found something genuinely dark. I didn't press it. Some things don't need pressing. In the second year, she started asking me about the outer rim stations. Not as a social exercise, she was not making conversation to fill time. She was studying human administrative geography the way she studied everything, methodically and with specific questions. She wanted to know which station systems had the oldest bilateral compact provisions. She wanted to know whether the personnel records management standards were consistent across the outer lane network or whether there were jurisdictional variations. She wanted to know, specifically, how a garrison medical records clerk learned to file documentation that held up under retrospective review. I told her about Thresh 4, where I had spent 4 years working under a senior records clerk named Os Idraz, who had been filing garrison medical documentation for 31 years, and who had developed a set of personal procedural standards that exceeded the compact requirements by a wide margin. I told her that Osai had once told me that the purpose of a record was not to satisfy the immediate requirement of whoever was reviewing it, but to survive the requirement of whoever might need to review it in 20 years for a reason no one had anticipated yet. I told her that this had seemed abstract to me at 27, and had seemed entirely correct to me at 35, and had felt obvious to me at 45 in a way that I couldn't have explained to my younger self. She listened to all of this without interrupting. Then she said, "The original classification board did not apply that standard." I said that was right. She said, if they had applied that standard, if they had filed documentation that would hold up conducted by one who did not share their assumptions, the error would have been identified within the first year. I said that was probably accurate. She said, instead they filed documentation that satisfied the immediate requirement. I said yes. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, I have been reading about Article 7. I said I would pull the relevant archive if she wanted. She said she already had it. I said all right. She said, I want to make sure I understand the procedural history before I read the provisions themselves. Is it possible to access the compact legal archive commentary from your department terminal? I said I would set up the access level. She said, thank you. I said it was no trouble. She said, it is not no trouble. It requires a permission filing. I said I would file it. She said, I know. I appreciate that you will. Then she looked at the light panel, and we sat without talking until my break ended. That was the second year. She liked the morning light in the courtyard, the slightly too blue version before the calibration and the corrected version after. She noticed the difference immediately on the first morning after the panel was adjusted and said nothing about it until I mentioned it. And then she said, yes, with a precision that I had learned was how she expressed gratitude when gratitude felt too large a thing to name directly. She did not sleep well. This was in the research files, documented clinically. What was not in the files was that it was worst on the anniversaries of deaths, not people she knew, but people whose grief she had absorbed, whose loss imprints had become part of her interior archive. She carried other people's mourning on dates she had never lived. She did not tell me this. I figured it out from the pattern of her absences from the courtyard over 2 years and did not say so, because she had not chosen to tell me, and I was not going to take the knowledge from her. I thought about that sometimes in the evenings in the records room. What it would be like to carry, in your body, the weight of grief you had not earned. The joy, too. She told me once that it was not all heavy, that there were moments in her archive she would not trade but mostly the grief, because the research files were honest about what her worst periods looked like, and the worst periods were always about loss. There was one afternoon in the middle of the second year when I came to the courtyard and found her sitting with her hands flat on her knees and her eyes closed, very still in a way that was different from her usual stillness. I sat down on the bench and did not say anything. After about 8 minutes she opened her eyes and looked at the broadleaf plants for a moment and said, "Someone died today." She said it matter-of-factly, as a report. One of the research staff's family members. "He is in his office on the second floor. I can feel it from here." She paused. "I will have it in my archive by tomorrow. I cannot prevent that, but I wanted to sit here first while it is still outside me before it becomes mine." I did not say I was sorry. I did not say anything about the research staff member. I sat on the bench and was there, which was the only thing I had to offer and which I had learned was sometimes enough. After a few minutes she said, "You are not going to ask whether I am all right." I said I could see she was managing. She said, "Most people ask." She was looking at the plants. "They ask because they do not know what to say, and asking feels like doing something." She paused. "You know what to say and you choose not to say it. That is different." I said I wasn't sure. I always knew what to say. She said, "You knew not to say it today. That is sufficient." We sat there until the light panel moved to its afternoon setting, and then I went back to the records room and she stayed in the courtyard, and I filed the afternoon's reports, and neither of us mentioned it again. What the research files did not know, because no one had asked the right question, was that she had been studying the Velthori royal house succession structure for the last year and a half. She told me about it on a Thursday afternoon, very precisely, because she had found something in the archival records, and she wanted to tell someone before she decided what to do about it. The Velthori Onveth memory archivist lineage was not extinct. The Velthori court had published a succession notice 11 years ago declaring the lineage dormant, which was the institutional category for a royal function, whose last practitioner had been removed from court operation due to classification as a burden carrier. Dormant was not extinct. The distinction mattered because of an Article 7 compact provision regarding royal succession lineages that were on record as dormant rather than terminated. They retained certain procedural rights that terminated lineages did not. Specifically, the right to a reclassification review if new evidence of lineage function emerged. She had found the evidence. It had been in her own research enrollment files all along, in the empathic field measurements, the reception range data, the archival retention assessments that the Union research team had been generating for 11 years and filing under anomalous transmission intensity. The data did not describe a burden carrier. It described, precisely and in measurable detail, an active memory archivist. The royal house had classified her incorrectly 11 years ago because the classification board had not included anyone with training in the Onveth archival lineage. The relevant expertise had been the memory archivist herself, and she had been 19 and in crisis, and no one had asked her. I listened to all of this. She had her notes. She walked me through the legal reasoning carefully, because she had been living with it for 18 months and had refined the argument until it had no excess in it. When she finished, I sat with it for a moment, and then I asked her what she wanted to do. She said she did not know yet. I said I would pull the relevant Article 7 procedures if she wanted to look at the filing requirements. She said, "I know the filing requirements. I drafted them 3 times. Then she was quiet for a moment and said, "I wanted to tell someone first before I decided." I asked why. She said, "Because once I file it, it will move. Things that move are harder to stop." I said that was true. She said, "I am not sure I want it to stop. But I wanted there to be a moment before it moved." I said I understood that. She said, "I know you do." We sat in the courtyard until the light panel began its amber gradient, and then she went back to her room and I went back to the records room, and I did not file anything and I did not tell anyone. 2 weeks later, she submitted the reclassification review request herself, through the standard compact filing portal, and I countersigned it as the relevant administrative coordinator, which was my job, and which I did at 9 in the morning the same day it arrived in my queue. The review process took 4 months. I filed the supporting documentation. She reviewed everything I filed and sent me corrections twice, both times on small formatting issues that would not have affected the outcome, but that she was right about. I corrected them. The Union Empathy Research Department submitted their 11 years of field measurement data without being asked. The review board's preliminary finding came back in the 3rd month, and it was exactly what she had predicted. The original classification had been in error. The Velthori Onveth memory archivist function was active and had been for at least 11 years. She was not a burden carrier. She was an archivist. During those 4 months, the courtyard conversations were different. Not in the way they talked. She was the same, precise and measured, asking real questions, listening to the answers, but in the quality of the silence between the talking. There was something that had not been there before, a kind of waiting, the way a room feels different when you know there is a document in the queue that has not resolved yet. She did not mention the review in those sessions. I did not mention it either. It was there the way a fact is there when both parties know it and have said everything that can usefully be said about it, and the rest is just time passing. On the day the preliminary finding arrived, I filed the notification to her in the standard administrative channel and then went to the courtyard at my break time. She was at the low wall. I sat down. She said, "I read the finding." I said I had assumed she had. She said, "The board found the classification error without reservation." I said yes. She said, "The final ruling will take another 4 to 6 weeks." I said that was the standard timeline for this category. She said, "All right." We sat for the rest of the break without talking, and I went back to the records room and she stayed. And when I passed the courtyard window 2 hours later, she was still there, looking at the light panel, her hands flat on her knees. She was an archivist. The 4th month was administrative processing. By the time it concluded, the formal reclassification notice had been transmitted to the Velthori Royal Court, and the Royal Court had responded within 72 hours with a retrieval request. I read the retrieval request when it arrived in my administrative queue on a Monday morning. It was correctly formatted. It cited the appropriate compact provisions. It requested that Sarel Onveth be prepared for transfer to a Velthori Royal Courier vessel that would arrive at Station Orith 9 within the standard transit period, which the attached schedule put at 11 days from the date of the request. I approved the request and filed the internal notification before I went to the courtyard. She was already there. The morning light panel was at its calibrated blue-white setting. She was sitting on the low wall by the planters, not reading, not working. I sat down on the bench across from her and she said, without preamble, "They responded quickly." I said they had. She said 72 hours. I said yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 11 years and 72 hours. The way she said it was not bitter exactly. It was precise. She was measuring the shape of a thing. I said I was sorry about the 11 years. She said, "You didn't do that." I said I knew. She said, "No, I mean you are the reason I found it. You filed the intake enrollment correctly. In year 2 you cross-referenced my field measurement data to the historical lineage records when you were formatting the annual summary, and you noted the similarity in a footnote. I read that footnote. I sat with that for a moment. I had written that footnote. I had not remembered writing it. It had been a small observation, the kind you add because the data is there and it seems relevant and the form has space. I said I was glad the footnote was useful. She said, "It was the thread." I did not know what to say to that. I sat in the courtyard and the light panel moved through its morning arc, and after a while I said I should go file the daily reports. She said yes. I got up and then I stopped because there was something I wanted to say and I was not sure whether I should say it, and I said it anyway. I said I was glad she was going home. She did not respond immediately. I was already at the courtyard door when she said, quietly, "I am not sure where home is." I said I thought she would find out. Then I went back to the records room. The 11 days passed in the way the station's days always pass. The same corridors, the same morning light panel cycling, the same supply requisitions and status reports, and the broken ceiling panel in the records room that nobody fixed. I filed the pre-departure administrative documentation, and she reviewed it and found no errors, which I took as either a good sign or evidence that she was not paying full attention, and I was not sure which. The research staff organized a departure acknowledgement in the common room on day 9. I attended. She was polite and precise, and spent most of the event standing near the window with a cup of tea she did not drink. On day 10, I sat in the courtyard at my usual break time, and she was there and we said almost nothing. Just the ordinary small things, the light panel and the plants. And then I went back to the records room and spent the afternoon reading the Compact's Article 31 provisions again, more carefully than I had the first 2 times. The Velthori Royal Courier vessel docked on day 11 at 1300 hours. I watched it through the observation port at the end of the East Corridor, a long white ship with the pale gold hull markings of the Anveth Royal House, which I recognized because I had been reading the Velthori heraldic records for the past 3 weeks and had found it more interesting than I expected. The docking procedure was standard. The departure gate opened at 1400. The retrieval officer was a Velthori man named Orvith Sanvel, 3rd-tier Royal House liaison, who arrived at my office at 1415 with the transfer documentation already prepared and who looked, when I asked him to wait while I reviewed the forms, as though reviewing forms was something I was doing specifically to inconvenience him. I reviewed the forms anyway. They were correct. I signed them. He said, "The departure is scheduled for 1500. I would like to begin the boarding process at 1445. I said that was fine. He said, "I will need the subject to be at the departure gate at 1445. I said I would pass the information along. He said, "I want to ensure there are no delays. The court has waited long enough." He said it evenly. "The way you say a true thing that you have decided is more important than the true things you are not saying." I looked at him for a moment and then I said that I understood and that I would make sure the departure went smoothly and that I appreciated his patience during the review. He nodded and left. I sat in my office for a few minutes, not doing anything. Then I pulled up the Compact Union Personnel Transit Rights Archive, Article 31, and read through the relevant provisions. I had read them twice already in the past week. I read them again. Then I went to the courtyard. She was at the low wall by the planters, which was where she always was, and she looked up when I came in and said, "You reviewed the transfer forms." I said I had. She said, "Were they correct?" I said they were. She looked at the light panel for a moment. It was in its afternoon setting. The warm gold that she had told me once was closer to the light she remembered from Velthar when she was young, though still not quite right. She said, "I have been trying to decide what to take. There is not very much." I said that was probably accurate, that 3 years in a research annex didn't accumulate much that was portable. She said, "I have the legal archive. I have been building a personal copy for 2 years. It is on a data card." I said that was probably the most useful thing to have. She said, "Yes." Then she said, "I have been trying to think whether there is anything I will want to remember that I have not already put in the card." She paused. "The light panel. I will remember the light panel." I said that was a strange thing to remember. She said, "You had it calibrated for me. I will remember that first." I sat down on the bench. After a moment I said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to say no if the answer is no." She said, "All right," I said. "When you get there to the royal court, to the Anveth house, is there anyone you know?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I know their grief. I know their losses. I have carried the emotional historical record of the Anveth house for 11 years without knowing what I was doing." I know the shape of 100 lives in there. She touched the side of her jaw where the filament organs were, a small gesture I had never seen her make before. But I have not spoken to any of them. I have not been home in 11 years. I said, you know Orith 9. She said, yes. I said, you know the courtyard. You know the light panel at the wrong setting and the corrected setting. You know the broadleaf plants that don't comfort you. You know the corridor that smells like cleaning compound on Mondays. She said, yes. I said, that's something to carry. She was quiet for a while. The afternoon light panel moved through its cycle. Somewhere along the south wall, one of the broadleaf plants was doing what broadleaf plants do in mid-afternoon light, which is nothing visible but which she had told me once she found pleasant in a way she couldn't fully explain. I watched her, and she was looking at the plants, and I thought about what she had said, that she had been trying to find something she wanted to remember, and I thought about the 11 years and the 72 hours, and the footnote in the annual summary that had been the thread. I said, I want to file a co-departure request. She looked at me. I said, Article 31, Section 4, Union Personnel Transit Rights. A research annex coordinator may request voluntary accompaniment to a subject's receiving location when there is documented evidence of ongoing administrative continuity interest. I said it levelly, the way you say a true thing. It is a small filing. It is within my authority to file it. It does not bind either party to anything, and it does not require the receiving institution's approval. It is just a document that says I am going with you. She was very still. The thing I had learned about Sorel Anveth, across 3 years and 167 status reports and 900 hours in the courtyard, was that she was still when something mattered, not frozen still. The way a person is when they are paying complete attention to something, and they do not want to miss any of it. She said, you cannot leave your posting. I said I had unused personal leave. I said I had submitted the leave request to the department head 40 minutes ago and received approval 12 minutes ago. I said I had also submitted the vacancy notice for my position, because if I was going to be away for more than 30 days, the department required it, and I had no way of knowing how long I would be gone. She said, you resigned your posting. I said I had submitted the vacancy notice. That was a technical distinction, but it was a real one. I said it was also possible I was making a significant error, that the Velthori Royal Court might not want me there, that the retrieval officer was certainly not going to enjoy the paperwork, that her situation was changing in ways neither of us could fully predict, and it was entirely reasonable for her to say no. She said, you filed the leave request 40 minutes ago. I said yes. She said, before you came to the courtyard. I said yes. She said very quietly, you decided before you asked. I said that was accurate. She was still for a long time. The afternoon light held. Then she said, I have been carrying the grief of a woman named Orvith Sonvel for 9 years. She was the retrieval officer's mother. She died on the 3rd moon of Velthar when I was 22 years old, and I was standing close enough to absorb the imprint, and I have had it ever since. His mother's grief. In me, she touched her jaw again. He doesn't know that. He has never been told. She looked at the light panel. I carry that, and I cannot put it down, and I cannot give it back. That is what I am. She paused. You are the first person in 11 years who has treated that as a fact about me rather than a fact about whether to stand near me. I said she was the most careful person I had ever met. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said something in Velthori that I did not have words for. I had spent 3 years as her intake coordinator, and the reference files had given me basic vocabulary, but my Velthori was functional at best, and the formal register was beyond me. I said I didn't have that one. She said, Orith Seneval. She said it again precisely so I could hear the syllables. Then she said, it means the one I chose to carry, not the one who carries me, not the one who bears my burden, the one I carry, voluntarily, because they are worth the weight. I sat with that for a while. She said, "It is not a common word. The memory archivist lineage uses it in the historical records for a specific relationship, the person the archivist keeps by choice, rather than by proximity, the person whose inner life you choose to hold." She looked at the plants. I did not know I was using it correctly until now. I said I was not sure what to say to that. She said, "You don't have to say anything. You already filed the paperwork." We went to the departure gate at 1440. The retrieval officer Orvith Sonvel was already there, with a tablet and a slightly compressed expression that suggested the morning had not unfolded according to his schedule. He looked at me and then at Sorrel and then at the co-departure request that I handed him, and he read it with the careful thoroughness of someone who is looking for a reason to object and is finding the document legally sound. He read it twice. Then he said, "This is highly irregular." I said I understood that. He said, "The royal court was not informed a human administrative coordinator would be accompanying the archivist." I said I had filed the relevant compact notification simultaneously with the leave request, and that the royal court's liaison office would have received it approximately 22 minutes ago. He said, "This will complicate the reception arrangements." I said I was sorry for the inconvenience. He looked at me for another moment, and then he looked at Sorrel. She was standing beside me at the departure gate with the data card in her pocket and no luggage except a small carry case that held, as far as I knew, a change of clothes and the wrong prescription reading glasses that the previous coordinator had left in the records room, and that she had been using for 3 years because the lenses blurred the light panels in a way that she found pleasant. She looked at the retrieval officer. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He said, "I will note the irregularity in my report." I said that was completely appropriate. He said, "We board in 10 minutes. Then he walked away to consult his tablet. The departure gate was a standard compact transit corridor, gray polymer walls and overhead light panels, and the low hum of the docking seal. There was no window. There was nothing to see. Sorrel stood beside me and looked at the corridor ahead, and I looked at the broken ceiling panel in the section of gate corridor above us, which had the same kind of improperly seated panel as the one in my records room, and I thought about how the outer transit stations all had the same infrastructure budget, and the same maintenance queue, and the same type of ceiling panel that nobody fixed. She said, "I have never been on a royal courier vessel." I said I hadn't either. She said, "The Onveth house staff will be Vilthori." I said I had been reading the relevant social protocols in the reference archive and had covered the basic proximity etiquette. She said, "You read the social protocols?" I said yes. She was quiet for a moment and then she said something I did not expect. She said, "I am going home." She said it as though she was testing the sentence, the way you say a word in a language you have been studying and suddenly hear it correctly for the first time. "I think that is what I am doing. I am going home." Then she said, "I don't know what it will be, the house, the court. I carry their history, but I have not lived in it." She paused. "But I think that is what I am doing." I said I thought so too. She said, "And you are coming?" I said yes. She said, "You filed the paperwork before you asked me." I said I had mentioned that. She said, "No, I mean, you made the decision and then you came to tell me. You didn't come to ask." She was looking at the corridor ahead. "You came to tell me, and then you made room for me to say no. That is different from asking." I thought about that. I said, "I wanted to go. I didn't want to not go. The only question was whether you wanted me there." She said, "And you filed the paperwork while you were still uncertain about the answer." I said the administrative queue was slow, and it was better to have it in early. She made a sound that I had heard once before in the second year, when I had inadvertently said something deadpan in response to a difficult thing she had told me, and she had found it unexpected. The sound was not quite a laugh, but it was in the direction of one, careful and brief, and with an edge of surprise in it, as though she had not entirely prepared for the moment. I said, "Is that funny?" She said no, then she said yes, then she said the administrative queue is slow. I said I was glad she found it amusing. She said I am going to carry this. She said it simply, factually, in the way she said things that were important to her. I will put it in the archive with the rest. The courtyard, the light panel, the footnote in the annual summary, the wrong prescription reading glasses. She paused. You. I didn't say anything. She said, that is what memory archivists do. We keep the things worth keeping. She looked at me sideways, and there was something in her expression that I had not seen before, or not seen clearly, not the still precision of attention, but something lighter, something that had room in it. I have been keeping yours for 3 years, slowly, carefully, the way you keep something you don't want to damage. The boarding signal came on. Orvith Sonvel was at the front of the gate corridor, his tablet under his arm, indicating with a gesture that it was time. I picked up my carry bag light, because I had not owned much worth owning for a long time, and had packed in 30 minutes on a Tuesday morning while the leave request was still pending, and I stood up. Sorrel said, Veth. I said yes. She said it in Velthori first, quietly, the formal register that I had been reading about and could mostly follow. The 3 syllables of the recognition, the inflection that indicated voluntary and permanent, the relational marker. Then she translated it herself, as she had done in the courtyard, with the precision of someone who has thought carefully about how to carry a thing from one language to another without losing the weight of it. She said, welcome home. I stood there for a moment. The departure gate light panels hummed. Somewhere behind us the annex was running through its afternoon routines, the staff in their offices, the courtyard cycling through its artificial light, the broadleaf plants doing whatever broadleaf plants do when no one is watching them. 3 years and 167 status reports and the ceiling panel that nobody fixed. I said, you know that's supposed to go the other way. She said, I know. She said it with the edge of surprise still in her voice, the one that sounded like almost a laugh. But you are the one who is arriving somewhere new. I am the one who knows what I am bringing with me. She picked up the small carry case. You are welcome home to wherever we are going. I am carrying it for you. I didn't have an answer for that. I didn't need one. I followed her down the boarding corridor toward the Velthori Royal Courier vessel with its pale gold hull markings. And Orvith Sonvel walked ahead of us making notes on his tablet with the compressed efficiency of a man who has decided that the irregularities are above his pay grade. And the annex disappeared behind the docking seal. And the light was different inside the ship, warmer, more gold, closer to the afternoon setting that she had told me was closer to right. And I thought about footnotes and ceiling panels and the very slow administrative queue. I thought about what she had said in the courtyard years before, that once things moved, they were harder to stop. I thought she had been right about that, and that it was fine.